the next part of the retreat would be to undertake the 5 precepts. Most of you are familiar with that, and we bring in these formalities. Somehow it becomes a kind of cultural norm of remembrance, and if you do it sincerely, then I think it has the power of a whole culture taking on this kind of work, taking on this kind of lifestyle, taking on these kind of moral principles. At least that's the way I see it. So I was first trained in Thailand, and I have a lot of Sri Lankan friends and Thai friends and Burmese friends and Malaysian friends and Cambodian friends and so on, who are Singaporean friends and so on, who are embedded in Buddhist cultures or very, very connected to them. And these rituals, when done as a body of practitioners, are very, very beautiful, very, very lovely to do. If you're more from a secular background and you're not used to these things, they're not necessary, so don't worry about it. But there is a beauty in ritual if it's done from the sincere heart, rather than just as a sort of cultural thing, artifact that you have to do. So it's not a necessary thing, but it has a lot of beauty in it. So the idea in the 5 precepts is that one of the congregation asks the monk for the 5 precepts. Obviously, you don't have to ask me to be moral. I hope you're doing it without my permission. But so it's not really that kind of a thing, but it's a formal sense of determination that all of us living together in this virtual retreat are going to undertake to live in a way which is respectful of each other, which is kind to each other, which is honest to each other, which has a sense of restraint in our lifestyle. And I'm sure we're already doing that, but this is a kind of classic way that any function in Theravada Buddhism begins.
Ante tisaranena saha panchasilani achama dutiyampi mayam bante tisaranena saha panchasilani achama tatiyampi mayam bante tisaranena saha panchasilani achama.
So for those of you who know the tradition, please just follow along with me. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. If you help me, if you do it, yeah, do it.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tisaranagamana nididhamma.
Amen.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
Adina dana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adinada Veramani Sikkhapada Samadhiyami.
I'm going to take the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that.
Kame sumi cha chara veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Kamesu Vichajara Veramani Sikkhapada Samadhiyami.
I'm going to take the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct.
And I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct.
Musavada veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Musavada Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami.
I take the precept to refrain from lying.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
Sura mera yamajapamada thana veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami.
Surame Raya Maja Pamadatana Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami.
I take the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
Imani panchasikapadani silena sukatinyanti silena bhoga sampata silena niputinyanti tasama silam visotaye.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
You got the best sadhu, don't you? So we have these formal formalities of bowing and hands in anjali, and these are very lovely gestures to set the tone of respect for the teaching and hopefully for the experience of the teacher, and then the heart is open to the teaching, and this teaching is a reflective teaching, right? It's not a doctrine to be believed, although believing is fine, but belief in itself won't really liberate you. So, like if you get two people arguing about what does the word dukkha mean? Does it mean suffering? It doesn't mean stress? Well, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you use the words that a teacher or a tradition gives you as reflection. So argumentation about, kind of historical accuracy, that's really off the point. And the thing about language is that sometimes scriptural language and doctrinal language becomes a kind of position that people take. And you say a word and they say, oh, I know what that is, but they don't reflect on it. But if you didn't have a teaching, on the other hand, if you didn't have a teaching, we would have the Buddha's word. You wouldn't have an entry point from an enlightened master, from an enlightened being into the problem of suffering. So whatever language I use, like we were just thinking about the word virtual, myself and Venerable Amar Siri before this meeting, virtual comes from virtue. So what's the connection? The strange and the virtual, virtue. And then we went on and on and on, but that's not Dharma, that's just language. Right? So what? So I get a definition of virtue being virtual, very clever. But that's not really Dharma, because it's not reflective. So the reflective capacity takes the words of the teacher and then tries to translate them into personal experience. And obviously my words may have a different connotation to you than to me. I may use the word virtue, say, which isn't a common word now I find in my society, and might found very Victorian and might have connotations to you which aren't actually what I mean, right? So language as reflection is very important to say, well, what's the guy talking about really? Rather than, this word means exactly this or that. What's the tone of it? And Ajahn Chah would say it's like listening with your heart. So don't listen with your head, listen with your heart. So the head kind of goes, sometimes in listening to Dhamma, it goes into a kind of critical, judging, analytical part of consciousness. Well, whereas listening with the heart is like receptive and allowing the ideas to come into you, and then seeing, okay, where does that fit into my understanding of my own spiritual practice? I would say listening with the heart. So we have 6 days, is it? I think 6 days together. which is the longest virtual virtue retreat I've ever done, and maybe all of us have done. So we just did that retreat with the Singapore, Malaysian friends and others, which was, I think, 3 days. So this will be interesting, see how it works. And we have the schedule. So those of you who can't fulfill the schedule because you're in different time zones, we'll try to post at the end of the day talks, and then you create your own schedule, whatever way you can. Meditation. I was listening to a podcast this morning on the rebooting of the education system in South Carolina, and it was quite interesting how difficult everyone is finding going back to school. Teachers, the government agencies, the mandates that the government's giving, the kids, the parents. It's a very, very, very complex problem. And then the podcast had to go to break, so the guy said, "Stay tuned, I'll be back after the break." And I was taken by that word, tune, stay tuned. And that's a kind of good way to look at or to consider what meditation might be about, like tuning into something. I find that more helpful than concentration. I find that word more helpful. Again, it's just words. Tuning into something, being attuned to something, something wholesome, something good, something that brings happiness and pleasure to the heart. So tuning in, and then like staying tuned to that for long periods of time. Samadhi, maybe something like that. So what I like to attune myself to is affection. I'm finding that's for me the last few months. The word affection is a really beautiful word. I'm finding it really rich in meaning and not intellectually, but rich in sensitivity, I think. So what I do with my own practice, I find a word, not just one. I have a vocabulary, but I find maybe one word which I find kind of tunes me into something which is very, very important. And for me, very important is the whole realm of the heart and the attunement to that which is wholesome in the heart. And so the way I attune to affection is I do it a lot through photos. So I have in my photos and statuary, I have very few open walls now in my room. I have pictures of Ajahn Viradhammo and Longpa Cha and my first teacher and Longpa Liam, and pictures of the Sangha and Sri Rama Maharshi and John Klein and even Indra. Even Indra's up there. So I have all these photos, and they're all very, very meaningful to me. And when I look at a photo of someone that is dear to me, in whatever way, it might be familial, it might be through my gratitude to teachers or whatever. When I look at that picture, I don't really have to think much, but that tunes me into affection and gratitude and all those aspects of the heart which are very important to me. And if I sustain that, both by visually looking at that, and I do that, I'll be writing an email and getting bored with it, and I'll look at Sri Ramana and just look at the gaze of his eyes, or I'll light a candle to my mom, or I have a huge picture of Longpa Cha staring across the wall. I just look at him, and I'll always try to return to this tuning in to affection, and that's not sentimental. It's not sentimentality where I think, oh, Longpa Sinego, I love you so much. I wish I was with you. It's not that. It's not in thought, actually. It's in the body. It's in the energy. It's in a kind of vibration, isn't it? It's a kind of tune that the heart can be attuned to, or a note, maybe like a note. If you see what I mean? And so if I do that a lot, and then I do that in my practice of just formal sitting practice, or I do that with the animal realm, or I even do that with the sky or the blueness of the sky. There's a lot of beauty around which can evoke that sense of affection in me. Then the negative parts where the ego is created, fears and the aversions and the harsh judgments and the self-criticisms that might come up, they now come up within a field of affection. They come up more and more as I practice within a certain there's a certain note playing, and that note is one of affection. And so when another note comes in of some kind of aversion or greed or whatever it is, then that note of this other scale, the scale of egotism or selfishness in an unskillful way, is noticed very, very strongly. Why? Because now there's a tune, there's a note that is appropriate, that is proper, that is still, that is loving, that is caring. And then when the other comes in, it's noticed. Now, if I can then return to the tuning into the affection, then the negativity has no power. Now, what happens, I think, for all of us is, as I said on that retreat with the Malaysian Singaporean group, we're very good people. You know, we wouldn't be here if we weren't. And we suffer oftentimes from a high sense of idealism. And as soon as these negativities come into consciousness, we very quickly judge them and try to get rid of them. And get caught in a sort of tussle with them. So the practice, and when I talk about affection, I'm talking about metta bhavana. And I find myself always trying to use different kinds of words, because when you say metta bhavana, then, oh yeah, I know what that means. But perhaps if I use a different kind of word, it might trigger off a more reflective response from you or from them. I don't know. So consider affection. Well, what is that in the human heart? That's important, isn't it? And is that just something that comes from the external? Like, is my life only affectionate when I am struck by some image or person who brings that out into me, or can I bring that back into the world? And I would say this is what meditation is trying to do for us. It's bringing wholesomeness and goodness not only for ourselves in some kind of a personal way, but also it's what we can give back to the world. We can, it's like the ocean comes in, right? The ocean comes in into the shoreline, and then there's the reaction. The ocean comes in and there's the shoreline. Is that all we are? Like, is that all we are? Is just reactive? And so when things are wholesome and beautiful, we are affectionate, and when they're not, we're grumpy. Well, no, we don't have to be victims to the waves coming in. We can actually offer something back. And so meditation, hopefully for me, is something that both brings goodness into my own life, into my own heart, enhances goodness, makes it stronger. But then that my response to the world comes from that place, and there's a joy in that. There's a joy in being able to respond to negativity with a sense, no, I'm not going to take up that tune. That's not a tune that I want to play right now, thank you very much. But that's not rejection. That's not aversion. That's not a desire to get rid of. It's more, no, that's a tune. No, I'll go back to the other tune, the tune of affection. So what note, like for you, could you easily strike that would be wholesome? You might call it calm. You might call it composure. You might call it collectedness. Whatever language you want to use. What kind of a tune or an attunement would meditation be about for you? Now that's different than just trying to get something. Or if you're meditating, you're trying to get some object, some objective experience, then you're in real trouble because you're not really in tune with the way things are. That's the basic tune, isn't it? It's the capacity to awaken to this moment in all its complexities, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. That is the basic work of the choir, work of the individual in the choir, that you have to come into the moment and know the moment. And so we say, awakening to the way things are. And the more we practice, we see how profound that simple instruction is. Awaken to the way things are. It's not facile. It's not easy. It's actually very, very profound. The language is very elegant, actually. When Lompa Samedo says it's like this, It's an incredibly elegant statement if you're a practitioner. Because if you do that as a reflection, if you do that, it's like this, then you're in tune with the way things are. So that's the first and primary thing of any contemplative life, be it meditative, be it service, whatever, right? So in your meditations, how do you remember this moment? And how does that work for you? Do you use language? Do you use imagery? Do you just do it? Whatever, right? And then from that awakening, then you can begin to know the tune, the vibration, the energy that's moving through you. Now that's different, I would say, than just the narrative that's moving through you, the storyline, the past and future kind of stuff that we always get involved in. That's kind of not very deep, is it? Like if I feel angry at the neighbor for something, I never see the neighbor actually. But anyway, if I had a neighbor that I could see, and I was irritated at the neighbor, right? If I was just trying to get something called non-aversion, then I'm not really in tune with the very feeling that's going on, right? So this awakening to the way things are is actually quite difficult, because it's more difficult to kind of be critical to yourself. And this awakening is deeper than the narrative. It's like, what's the underlying aramana, or aroma, as they say in Thai? What's the underlying aramana? Well, it's negative, or it's averse, or it's fearful. That's not a judgment, that's a noticing. Right? It's not saying you should feel that. So that awakened mind is something that, you know, any teacher is going to be banging away until you die, right? You're going to be hearing this forever. And it's amazing how we can forget, isn't it? I mean, we know this. It's not new information. We know this, and yet we can get very much forgotten. We can forget ourselves, as it were, in all the narratives of thought, of past and future. So then if you use your meditation as a kind of platform, you tune in to the presence of the way things are, and then you refine that tuning to a sense of composure and collectedness. How would you do that? Would you do it just by blindly concentrating on something? Would that work? Maybe, maybe not. How would you do that? How would you compose your mind and collect your mind? And then, but we are also heart beings. We're not just like, you know, there's something very important about the human condition, which is emotional, not in a negative sense. And the Buddha certainly stressed that with the Brahma Viharas, that we have a capacity for compassion, we have a capacity for caring, we have a capacity for peace. And those are the emotional signs of liberation, of a successful, shall we say, contemplative life, of a fruitful contemplative life, what the heart is doing. And so I find that combination very, very good, the combination of awakening to the way things are, and then sustaining that awakeness through some kind of heart connection. So I use the word affection. Next year, something else maybe, but this year. But it's the same theme. It's the same kind of theme. So what I don't know what I'll do on this retreat. I'll probably talk of it and so on. I never quite know what a retreat is going to be like. And usually on a retreat like at Arnpride, I respond to 35 people sitting in front of me. And now this is a different kind of situation. So we'll see where it goes. But just because that's on my mind, affection is on my mind, maybe you could consider that too. What would that be for you? Metta bhavana, affection. What would that be an important part of your meditative life? And how would that be important? And these are, you know, the questions you have to ask yourself. How could you sustain that attunement? How might that work for you? And then take that into whatever object of meditation you use. Well, obviously I'll teach certain, you know, I'll try to teach certain objects of meditation, but more than just the kind of technique-y kind of stuff, right? What is the kind of whole attitude that you bring to your meditation? Is it one of striving? Is it one of falling asleep? Or does it have affection in it? Is not affection important? Affection is pleasurable. And think about it, that if you're going to meditate for 6 days, it'd be helpful if it was pleasant, right? Now, you could do pleasure by just eating tubs of ice cream, but I don't think you do it for 6 days. That's not going to be pleasant. So this is a different kind of pleasure because it's allowed. This is actually allowed. The Buddha said, metta is allowed. Do it a lot. And then do it some more. It's because it's beautiful. So if we can make beauty and pleasure not things which are... Sometimes I guess in all religions maybe, pleasure is all sort of equated to evil. Oh no, you're having fun again, Viradhammo. No, that's not the way. and so we sometimes think that somehow maybe we're supposed to just kind of grind it out to enlightenment. But the heart which is enlightened is a happy heart. It's not a miserable heart. Huh? You think of all the great teachers you've met. Do they kind of look at you in misery? Usually they're pretty jolly people. And why is that? Because that's a foundation. Now the teaching talks about suffering and the end of suffering, right? It does talk about the end of suffering, not just suffering. Remember that. So there is an end of suffering. And when we enter into the Brahma-viharas, into the states of heart and consciousness, which are based on affection, are based on goodwill and goodness, then we have a pleasure in the heart, which allows us to investigate and contemplate and hold this kind of work for long periods of time, for long periods of time. So I would ask you too then, in your meditation, what is pleasurable? Well, the body sometimes is not pleasurable. It hurts and so on. Is there something pleasant in your attitude? Or is it one of just like striving? How would you bring that into mind? Then take a picture of someone who is endearing to you. Look at that picture and think whatever you want to think, whatever you feel, whatever you think, whatever you feel. Doesn't that feel nice? Isn't that a great feeling? Right? And that's not a tub of ice cream, it's allowed. So then how could I take that pleasantness of affection and sustain that maybe with the breath? How could I combine that attitude of goodness and wholesomeness, and then have a kind of affectionate regard with one in-breath, affectionate regard with one out-breath. Now, this isn't sentimental again. It's actually quite hard to do. But if you could do that for a few breaths, then what are you doing? You're collecting the mind, composing the mind, but also your heart's kind of open to it. You're not just trying to control the mind in a very willful way. So these are some of the considerations I think I'll be probably repeating again and again. Awakening. I like to use sound. Just listen to sound. So then you're in tune with what's going on now. And it doesn't really matter. It's not the quality of the sound or whatever, but it's that you know that you're in tune with it. You're here with it. You know that you know. And just savor the silence of that. Very simple. And feel your body. Just whatever physical feelings you have right now, let it become conscious. So where might affection come into this? affectionate regard for your own body. Would that not be a sort of note that you place into awareness itself? A kind regard to your body sitting here. And these simple exercises just savor the silence of knowing. And then you could localize your attention. You could go to the center of the chest and feel the rising and falling of the chest with the breath. So you could have like a sense of caring, couldn't you? Like caring for that experience. And then into that practice, you can introduce a picture of someone who is dear to you. Say, you could do that on the in-breath. You can name the person or visualize them. And then on the in-breath, let that picture come into your heart. And then the next in-breath, you could do that again. So if you use the name, I use Lompo Samego or Lompo. In-breath. And that's like looking at his picture, a sense of affection. So then having connected to affection, I could just be with the breath, with that attitude. So let's sit quietly with those ideas.